Hi, this is Evelyn Baum, and I am partnering with Pegueros, and we are talking about gun control, and we have great interviews and great thoughts about it. We as citizens have a right to own weapons, specifically firearms. People may think that guns are dangerous and unsafe, but it's quite the opposite. Only people who can be trusted with a gun can own one. People who may have criminal tendencies or unstable health will be denied. The idea that firearms shouldn't be accessed by the public is backed up by biased fear instead of fact. The United States Second Amendment supports the right to own firearms. Limiting access to firearms puts citizens in more danger since gun restrictions will not stop people who are determined to get a firearm. In a growingly dangerous world, rights to own guns will protect citizens. We all have a moral right to life, which entitles us to a right of self-defense. The small minority of people who do not agree with the right to bear arms should not ruin it for others. Guns are not the only thing that can be a danger. Any household tool, such as kitchen knives, can be dangerous. The only difference between danger and protection is the person who wields the firearm. The question on firearms should not be, do we need them? Rather, it should be, who needs them? In a growing, violent world, firearms can provide protection from muggings to mass shootings. They are a necessary tool in a world that prioritizes protection. The act of removing our weaponry access makes us vulnerable as a community. We are susceptible to attacks without the tools to defend ourselves. Welcome, my name is Evelyn Baum, and we'll be talking about gun control and the ideas behind that. I will be interviewing Jason Baum, and I have some questions for him.
Very good, thanks.
Do you support gun control?
So I think that's a complicated question. A lot of people would say yes, and some people would say no, but I think that's an incomplete, disingenuous answer. There's a lot more nuance to that question, and hopefully I can explain some of my ideas about that.
Great. Do you think limiting gun access reduces violence?
So I don't know that we have evidence, and I have never seen the evidence to show that that's the case. Now, if the question is, does eliminating all guns eliminate gun violence? Yes, that's obvious. Yes. Now, but the question was, does it reduce violence? Certainly violence has occurred throughout history, and it was probably far greater than it is today. It was early in human history, there was incredible amounts of deaths and destruction caused by humans, and they didn't use guns to do it. So I don't know that even in places where guns do not generally exist, there is still violence, there's still destruction. In different parts of Africa, for example, where there is death and people are dying on a massive scale, they're often not killed by guns, but they're killed by starvation, they're killed by other physical attacks.
Okay, do you think limiting gun access changes the balance of powers in society?
So that's a very great question. So actually, guns, in history, the strong have been able to prey on the weak. Mm-hmm. So that means that whoever is the biggest, whoever has the most people, the control of the soldiers or things like that, they can always run amok. They can, so to speak, unabated. They can enforce their will. Now, with guns, it changes the balance of power to allow, in a violent situation, someone who is a woman, someone who is weak, someone who is small, someone who's old, it allows them to actually have the same strength and ability as someone who is strong or someone who is a bully.
Okay, are there any positive benefits for a nation in general to support individual gun ownership?
So one of the things I think about is in history, the Japanese was considered attacking the U.S. mainland because they knew that there were a large number of gun owners on the Japanese in the U.S. mainland. They determined and calculated that their efforts would ultimately fail. And so I think for the strength of a nation to defend themselves, having the ability of the individual peoples to have guns, I think is a benefit if that is a scenario that could happen in the future. I also think about there are people who are disadvantaged or people who are would be easy to prey upon who could then defend themselves if they have that right and ability.
Yeah. Do you think limiting gun ownership reduces deaths within a country?
Okay, so once again, if you were to phrase the question, do you think it reduces gun deaths from person to person? Obviously, if the people don't have guns, then that would be eliminated completely. So yes, in that case, yes.
Yes.
But that is not how historically the deaths on a massive scale have occurred. Deaths on a massive scale have occurred when the government itself has preyed upon people within its own borders. So, for example, when the Nazis expanded their borders to take over Poland and other areas, they immediately turned on the people inside, and they decided to kill on a massive scale the people who were Jewish or the people who were mentally handicapped or the people who were homosexual or something or had some other types of unwanted type behaviors or something that the government itself found unfavorable. And as the people had no way to defend themselves, they were able to just cause massive destruction. Now this is not hasn't just happened in just that one situation. It happened even on a larger scale in Russia with Stalin and the idea that they were against the people who were owners of property and had other owners of land and things like that. They killed many, many more, maybe double the number in Russia and the Soviet Union, and that occurred to their own people. So that's a drastic increase in violence. Not to be outdone, the Chinese and Mao Zedong, he felt that there were people that needed to be killed within their own government. So they had eliminated the guns and the weapons of the people. Therefore, without any hindrance whatsoever, he was able to kill on an unbelievable scale something, like 3 times what Stalin, 3, 4, 5 times what Stalin did in his country, he was able to do within China. So could there be an argument where if there were no guns in a certain place, would there be less deaths on a small scale? It's probably true.
Yes.
Is that going to prevent 60 million people being killed? No, it would not. In fact, it would aid in that goal of eliminating 60 million people.
Wow. So, should the right to own firearms become an unalienable right?
So, good question. Inalienable right is, from what I understand, it was kind of defined in the Declaration of Independence as the pursuit of life, or the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So an argument could be made that having the ability to have guns does defend the right to life of a person against someone like Mao Zedong, or any other, or maybe even on a small scale, someone who's a woman alone in her home, and someone decides to break in and do what they would with her. Guns can actually facilitate that inalienable right to life. Liberty is freedom. So gun control itself, whether we like it or we don't like it, it is a limitation of liberty, a limitation of liberty of the people. And the pursuit of happiness. Now, it may not be my desire or goal to own guns or shoot guns or something like that, but other people may have that as their pursuit of happiness. So in some sense of the word, there is a relationship there already.
Okay, so what type of people shouldn't own guns?
I think that certainly it would be unreasonable to think that people who are mentally ill should own guns. I think it would be unreasonable to say that people who are criminals and who have, by their own actions, have made choices to take away their other rights that they have. For example, they may not be able to drive a car if they have driven in an irresponsible manner. They may not be able to, or they may not be able to walk about freely, then they would have to be locked up. So I don't think it's unreasonable to take away guns for people who have committed crimes or are mentally unfit to have that kind of responsibility.
Okay, what type of people should own guns then?
So that's a great question. I think that people who have the desire to own guns as part of the liberty that they have should be able to own them. So by default, I'd say that would be anyone who is a responsible adult. Now, should anyone be required to own a gun? No, I don't think so. That would once again be taking away the liberty of people. and taking away freedom. And so I don't think that anyone must own a gun, but at the same time, if you haven't disqualified yourself, I think it's a good thing to do.
Okay, under what scenario would you support the complete elimination of guns?
Okay, so it is said in the Bible, for example, that at one point there's going to be, swords beaten into plowshares, and in other words, that there will be some sort of elimination of guns in the future, or maybe not guns, but any weapons of war.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there is an idealistic idea that it could be a good idea to get rid of weapons of war. And it's certainly supported by the Bible, for example. But there are some caveats in which it would need to really happen before that would be feasible and would be something that would work. One is that there wouldn't be any evil and strong people who are trying to harm and take advantage of the weak, the good, the innocent people. So, assuming that's the case, it would be okay for that to happen. Also, when Japan went and attacked China, they were so happy to find out no guns. Chinese have no guns and we have lots. And so they went and it's commonly referred to as the rape of Nanking. Certainly that's a anglicized version of the town, but where they systematically and for sport killed as many people as they possibly could. And the people were defenseless as they had no guns, and the Japanese had all the guns. That happened again with the Japanese in the Philippines, where they killed, something like 250,000 Filipinos who had no defenses, and they did it for sport and for fun. So if we can have a guarantee that there would be no future attackers like those, I think it would be reasonable not to have guns. Also, if we could be reasonably sure that there would be no more Mao Zedongs, there would be no more Stalins, there would be no more Hitlers, and that we could be safe from our own government. And certainly we may think, well, that happened over there, it could never happen here in the United States. Well, actually, in Missouri in the 1800s, there was kind of disagreements with various militias or some may say mobs and other citizens in Missouri, which were the Mormons, and there started to be burnings and things of fields and houses of the Mormons, and the governor said, hey, I'm afraid there's going to be violence breaking out, so we need to have gun control. We need everybody to turn in their guns. So the Mormons did turn in their guns. But the people who were burning did not. Immediately thereafter, the governor said, now we have a new ruling from the governor, and that is that all the Mormons shall be massacred and eliminated from the state. So we think of that as being something that could never happen here, but it already has happened here, and it could happen again. I also think of the fact that we have 325 million guns by estimation in the United States. If all the good people complied and said, here's all of our guns, somehow the balance of power will move to the people who don't.
Yeah.
We could see that in Prohibition, for example, where the people who organize crime and other sorts of unsavory individuals suddenly gained prominence and stature. And that would certainly happen with any law that we could do like that. But if we could guarantee that didn't happen, and we could immediately vanish into thin air all 325 million guns, that would be something that it would be required. Also, there are people, for example, that need to protect against animals and things of that nature, maybe Alaska areas, other wild areas, and people who hunt and people who depend on that for their livelihood or for their families to eat and survive. So if those people could have guns, I think that would be required also. And ultimately, we need to look at the idea, are we living in a democracy or not? Do we have a dictatorship where one or a few people are controlling the masses, or do the masses have the right to vote and decide for themselves what they want? The idea of gun control has never passed a democratic vote. It's always a small group of people or an individual dictating the rules for the masses. It would be if the vast majority of people in the United States believe that we should eliminate guns, then I think that would be something to consider. But we do have to consider this too. The majority often tramples the rights of the minority. Okay? So, for example, if, maybe let's go back 5,000 years. If they would have had a vote to say, should we end slavery? They would have said no. And even if they said, okay, the slaves can vote too. So there's been slaves in existence since the beginning of time. From everywhere in the world has been, in their time, has been slaves to other people within the country or in other places. It doesn't matter. But even if they were given the right to vote, they would be the minority. And so the majority would always say, oh, sorry, we voted, and you're out. You're still a slave. Yeah. In a classroom setting, if the students all voted and said, I'm sorry, teacher, we have all voted, and you must give all of us A's. That's the majority going against the minority, but we always have to watch out that the majority doesn't trample the rights of the minority. So even if there were people who the majority did vote and said, we want to take away the guns from those guys. We want those guys to have their rights reduced. We want them to have their privileges reduced. We have to be very careful about that.
And this is my last question. What, if anything, would you tell anti-gun protesters?
Okay, so I think that the people who are anti-gun, I think are very honest in their heart and their desire to end suffering. They want to end violence, end gun violence.
Right.
They perhaps have had people who have been shot or killed or something, and they feel very deeply that they want to do something to prevent that kind of thing from happening again. And I think that's a very noble idea, to try to defend people from harm.
Yeah.
So, but they need to, I would say they would need to also consider that they're voting to take away rights. And they're trying to take away rights of people that's not themselves. So they're trying to eliminate capabilities or abilities that they find unfavorable. Another thing, and they're trying to do it in a non-democratic process.
Yeah.
They're trying to do it in a dictatorship, even if that dictatorship is them and their friends. They're trying to dictate the rules for someone else. They also need to realize that the real fear that they may have, not this year, not next year, maybe not this decade, but sometime it's always been a country's own government is the real mass murderer. And governments in war, and I don't think those and any small gains we would have now would pale in comparison with the dangers we would open ourselves up to in the future.
Wow, that is an amazing point. That is the rest of my questions, and thank you a lot for your time and your viewpoints.
Thank you very much.